Question 20 of Prima Secunda of the Summa Theologia has to do with the goodness and malice in external human affairs. And we are now in our second to last question of this treatise on human acts, acts peculiar to man. And, I'm learning as I go along and teach this. And so new insights come to me as I go along. And I was thinking at the beginning of this treatise, I probably should have gone into a little bit more detail about some of the other philosophies and what they have to say about human actions, because it's fundamental to being a human being. And as Thomas says, it's something that is peculiar or proper or unique to the human person to have a body and have free will and to be able to make decisions and have contingencies, and not everything is just out of instinct. So real quickly, before we get into this, I just want to say that what Thomas is going to be concerned about in these 6 articles is the distinction between the action itself and the interior act of the will. So what is the intention as opposed to the action itself? Now, he's touched on this already, but now specifically, how does that impact the goodness or malice of external actions? And so I just want to mention a couple of people. Immanuel Kant, who was an 18th century German idealist philosopher, had what was called the categorical imperative, where everything was based on goodwill, that you like innately knew what was to do. And he famously said that you act upon a maxim that what you do would only be that which you would also at the same time make a universal law. So if you want to lie in one circumstance, well, do you want to make that a universal law that everybody can lie? If you want to commit adultery, well, is that going to be everybody can commit adultery? So that was his standard. And then you have utilitarians, where everything was based on pleasure or the greatest good for the greatest number of people. You have pragmatists, where they basically say, hey, whatever works, right? And it was very much based on kind of a Hegelian dialectic, trial and error kind of thing. And then the existentialists, they're kind of figuring it out on their own, because, everything comes from inside them, and they're not really relying on anything from the external. They want to be authentic. And as Sartre said, don't have bad faith. Don't rely on somebody else to create your moral structure. Then there's something called fundamentalism, which I think would apply to St. Thomas Aquinas, but there's some fundamental basis of moral actions. And I think Thomas would say that's the eternal law, the divine reason to which our reason and our will ultimately conforms. And so, all right, long intro, but we'll get into this now. Article 1, whether goodness or malice is first in the action of the will or the external action. Okay, so is it the intention or is it the external action? Thomas says external actions may be said to be good or bad in 2 ways. First, in regard to their genus and the circumstances connected with them. Okay. Thus, the giving of alms, if the required conditions be observed, is said to be good. Secondly, a thing is said to be good or evil from its relation to the end. Now, this has to do with intention. Thus, the giving of alms for vainglory is said to be evil. You do it for a wrong reason. Now, since the end is the will's proper object, it is evident that this aspect of good or evil, which the external action derives from its relation to the end, is to be found, first of all, in the act of the will, whence it passes into the external action. Consequently, if we consider the goodness of the external action, insofar as it comes from reason's ordination and apprehension, it is prior to the goodness of the act of the will. But if we consider it insofar as it is the execution of the action done, it is subsequent to the goodness of the will, which is its principle. So you say, I want to go, to the soup kitchen and feed the homeless. Well, that has to do with the reason. You're apprehending the actual thing that you're going to do. But what you really want to do is, when you go there, you're looking for a job, or you're trying to impress your boss, or whatever. There's some other reason you're going. Well, that has to do more with the interior, disposition of the will, and the end was never really to feed the homeless in the first place. Whether the whole goodness and malice of the external actions depends on the goodness of the will. So is the action entirely dependent upon the intention, or the why? In that case, going to the soup kitchen, is everything with the action have to do with the intention? He says, that which is in respect of the order to the end depends entirely on the will, while that which is in respect of due matter of circumstances depends on the reason. Okay, as we've already kind of explained. And on this goodness depends the goodness of the will insofar as the will tends towards it. All right, for a thing to be evil, one single defect suffices, whereas for it to be good simply, it is not enough for it to be good in one point only, it must be good in every respect. If therefore the will be good, both from its proper object and from its end, it follows that the external action is good. That makes sense. But if the will be good from its intention of the end, this is not enough to make the external action good. If the will be evil, either by reason of its intention or the end, or by reason of the act willed, it follows that the external action is evil. So it really means that everything has to line up. You have to have a good intention and a good action. You could have a good intention, but it may, my intention is to go to my, my ex-girlfriend's wedding, but it all, because it was not a good idea. It was a good intention, but the action ended up flopping because it caused all kinds of drama, I guess you could say, right? Okay, that's just an example that popped into my mind. All right, Article 3, whether the goodness and malice of the external action are the same as those of the interior act. Okay, is it all the same thing? This is interesting. He says the interior act of the will and the external action considered morally are one act. Now, it happens sometimes that one and the same individual act has several aspects of goodness or malice, and sometimes that it has but one. Hence, we must say that sometimes the goodness or malice of the interior act is the same as that of the external action, and sometimes not. These two goodnesses or malices of the external internal acts are ordained to one another. All right, so let's see. Do I want to read this? And I think we'll skip that. You get the idea. It can be one act, but sometimes you are able to differentiate the different aspects of it. But ultimately, it's one action with a number of different parts. Okay, let's leave it at that. Whether the external action adds any goodness or malice to that of the interior act. All right, so you have a bad intention, and then the action's good. This kid wants to upset his mom by cutting his hair. It's a bad intention, but then it actually looks quite good, and his mom's very happy with it. Well, did the good action mitigate the badness of the intention? If we speak of the goodness which the external action derives from the will tending to the end, then the external action adds nothing to this goodness, unless it happens that the will in itself is made better in good things or worse in evil things. And then he gives some examples, as Thomas is wont to do. A man wishes to do something with a good or an evil end in view, and does not do it then, but afterwards wills and does it. The act of his will is doubled, and a double good or a double evil is the result. So I don't quite understand that. I guess he willed to do it, then he didn't, and then I don't know. Okay. Secondly, in point of extension, when, for instance, a man wishes to do something for good or evil end and is hindered by some obstacle, whereas another man perseveres in the movement of the will until he accomplishes its deed, it is evident that the will of the latter is more lasting in good and evil, and in this respect better or worse. So I intended to rob a bank today, but then, I got busy and wasn't able to do it. Well, I still intended to do it, so that's still bad, but the other guy intended it and actually did it, and so, his is worse. Thirdly, in point of intensity, for these are certain external actions which, insofar as they are pleasurable or painful, are such as naturally to make the will more intense or more remiss, and it is evident that the more intensely the will tends to the good or evil, the better or worse it is. All right, Article 5, whether the consequences of the external action increase its goodness or malice. Now, this is where we get into consequentialism, where if we look at the consequences of the action, you can think of something, like a a parent being very draconian with their kids, and their kids are very obedient because they're afraid of them and they have an orderly house, but the means of getting there were not good. So are the consequences going to make the action and the intention okay? The consequences of an action are either foreseen or not. If they are foreseen, it is evident that they increase the goodness or malice. For when a man foresees that many evils may follow from his action, yet does not therefore desist therefrom, this shows his will to be all the more inordinate. But if the consequences are not foreseen, we must make a distinction, because they follow from the nature of the action, and in the majority of cases, in this respect, the consequences increase the goodness or malice of that action. For it is evident that an action is specifically better if better results can follow from it, and specifically worse if it is of a nature to produce worse results. So going back to my, going to your ex-girlfriend's wedding, and if you thought, well, this might cause some problems, so I can foresee consequences here that are not good, well, that clearly would be worse than just being totally naive and thinking, well, what could go wrong? This should be fine, All right. On the other hand, if the consequences follow by accident and seldom, then they do not increase the goodness or malice of the action, because we do not judge of a thing according to that which belongs to it by accident, but only according to that which belongs to it of itself. So circumstances are accidental to the act. Finally, Article 6, whether one and the same external action can be both good and evil. Okay, can something be good and evil at the same time? Nothing hinders a thing from being one insofar as it is in one genus, and manifold insofar as it is referred to another genus. You're thinking, okay, can you give us an example, Thomas? Yes, he will. Thus, a continuous surface is one, considered as in the genus of quality, and yet it is manifold, considered in the genus of color. Isn't that interesting? So this is one sheet of paper, but it has different colors. It has black and has white, right? Now, good example, Thomas. And accordingly, nothing hinders an action from being one, considered in the natural order, whereas it is not one, considered in the moral order, and vice versa, as we have stated above. For continuous walking, another example, for continuous walking is one action considered in the natural order, but it may resolve itself in many actions considered in the moral action. All right, so you're taking a walk and, you're jogging, which is a good thing, and then you come across a cat and you kick it, okay, while you're running intentionally. Well, that's bad. So there could be good and bad in the same action, but the generic kind of the species or the genus of the action is you're just jogging, right? All right, I like Thomas's examples better. If therefore we consider one action in the moral order, it is impossible for it to be morally both good and evil, whereas if it be one as to the natural and not moral unity, it can be both good and evil. Okay, I think you understand. All right, that is question number 20 of the Summa Theologia. Hope you enjoyed that. Tomorrow we'll have the final question of this treatise on the human acts, acts peculiar to man, and then we get into the passions, all right, which are clearly going to have an influence on human actions and are, the goodness or badness of actions. All right, thanks for joining me. We're going through the Summa one question at a time. And St. Thomas Aquinas, please pray for us. God bless you.